class.
Thank you so much, Felicia, for the wonderful introduction. It's so nice to see everyone's smiling faces in the classroom. And we are going to do some painting with water-soluble graphite today. It is very similar to using watercolors. So if you just found out about this class today and you're jumping in to paint along, and you're like, Lindsay, I don't have water-soluble graphite, you can go ahead and use regular watercolors for this. You will notice you'll get a different look. And I always think that it's always good to use what you have first and then decide whether a new product is going to benefit you and make your other products more useful. And the nice thing about the water-soluble graphite is, say you're like, I don't know if I want a whole palette of that. This is 6 colors here in this set we're going to use today. You could also use the Derwent Graphitint. That is basically the same product, but just smaller pans, but more colors of them. Or, you could always just get one chunk of water-soluble graphite, get like the dark gray color, and mix it in with your watercolors and experiment that way. So I urge you to use what you have and to follow along. The pattern was available to download from the Michaels site, so hopefully you have it transferred onto your watercolor paper. And we're gonna play. It's gonna take about an hour, and we are going to get this vintage propeller done. So Felicia, if you could switch the camera to my overhead view, we're gonna get started. Wonderful. And we're going to start by using a large brush, and you can use a large flat or a large round, whatever you have. And we are going to wet everything except for our subject. So I'm just going in here. I'm going to wet the background with clean water. Now, you may have seen you might notice that I have 2 buckets of water here on my table. The reason I do that is because I can have 1 bucket of water for cleaning my brush, and then the other bucket of water for grabbing fresh water from. So it's just kind of a handy way to make it so you don't have to run and empty your water bucket all the time, and you get nice, fresh, bright results. And anytime I want to wet my paper but not wet the entire paper, I always use a brush as opposed to a spray bottle. A spray bottle can be handy if you know you want to wet the whole thing. But just like watercolor, water-soluble graphite is only going to flow where the paper's wet. So that way we don't have to worry about keeping our subject clean. It's just going to stay clean because there's no water guiding the paint there. Now I am going to grab some of the blue water-soluble graphite, or your blue Inktense will be fine. Graphitint will be fine, but you could use Inktense as well. Now the colors will dry a little bit less vibrant, just like watercolors. So I feel like if you've used watercolors before, you're going to be very comfortable with this medium. I think sometimes we add a new thing to our stash, but then we get confused on how to use it. A good rule of thumb is just to try what you would normally do with a similar product and see how it goes. And if it doesn't work, then, try something else. Look up some tutorials or find a book on the subject. You can do techniques like lifting and color mixing and all of those techniques. Now, one thing I want to do before my paper dries up is to lift out some clouds. And I'm just going to grab my paper towel here. And I'm going to kind of scrunch it into a ball. And I'm going to lift out some clouds. Now, don't worry if it doesn't lift it all the way back to the white of the paper. We can either go in and scrub some more out if we feel like we want to, or we can use some white pastel pencil later to give those clouds white highlights. So, don't stress about it. The nice thing about lifting the clouds is that you get a much more natural look than painting around them. You get a nice soft edge, and it just is a nice, more natural look. And if you have any puddles, then I would try to soak up a little bit of that puddle water so that you don't end up with cauliflowers, which are kind of a ruffly edge shape. All right, we're going to continue down below the propellers. I'm going to start off with some of that blue again. Your paper might be drying quickly on you. I know it's very damp and humid in Maine, but we're just talking before the broadcast that Felicia's in Texas and they've got triple-digit days most days, numbers most days. So if your paper is drying too quickly, you can re-wet the area, but it's such a small space, it's probably fine. Now I'm going to grab the green. It's kind of like a mossy olive green here. And we'll put that down at the bottom. We're just going to let those blend. And if I have any sort of puddles, I'm just going to go soak them up. Now, if you like the textured appearance that called granulation that some paints have, the way you want to get that is by using a lot of water and letting, because it's when the pigments settle out of the paint, that's when you get that granulation look. So use lots of water and use a more textured paper to get more granulation look. So you can use water-soluble graphite as a way to bring granulation into your palette without having to invest in a new set of watercolors or several tubes of paint. You can get a few colors like this and just mix them into the colors that are similar, and that will give you that texture, which is really nice. So now I'm going to move to my round brush. I'm using a number 8 round, but you can use whatever color you have that's similar. And I'm going to use my darkest gray here. And I'm going to paint in this inner ring, and I'm not pre-wetting my paper because I don't want my paints to flow. I want to be able to keep my edges pretty controlled. We're just filling in the blocks here. A very simple project. Now, if you're primarily using your graphite like a watercolor set, you would probably prefer the Derwent Graphitint watercolor pen set because you get more colors and they're in a small case with a little mixing area. But if you also like to sketch and you think you might want to pick these blocks up and sketch with them, these are a good option for that. I also like to use large brushes, so I kind of prefer these large blocks to the smaller pans if it's got the color I want, just so I can use a large brush and not worry about damaging my my brushes. I'm going to bring this line all the way over. You'll notice that these paints are kind of thirsty, meaning they soak up the water, and it can feel like you need to add more water to them. You're not going to hurt anything by adding more water to them, so go right ahead. These paints also will have a little bit of shine to them. And if you really like that effect and you want it to be shinier, you can actually buff the dried paint with the back of a spoon. And what that will do is it will bring the shine out of the graphite and also flatten the tooth of your paper so that it looks extra shiny. Now I'm also going to take this color and very carefully, I am going to paint in the propeller wings here. You might want to leave a little bit of a gap, just a little slice of highlight between the background and the wings so that it doesn't bleed into the background. These do not flow as much as a traditional watercolor because of the pigment particle size. They're just a slower moving paint. So it does give you a little bit of freedom when you're sketching like this. You don't have to worry about everything just smushing together on you too quickly. And I can take note of where my lighter colors and where my darker colors are a bit. Rather than lift out later, I can go in and add more paint to certain areas. And something else you can do is lift while it's wet. And to do that, you take your brush, you clean it, and then you can go back in and you can lift out a little bit of a highlight, and your brush kind of absorbs that, and it can just give you a little bit of a shine. and a little bit of dimension. And keep filling up our spaces here. We're going to go onto this one on top, again, leaving a little bit of a gap. I love to see the texture develop. I don't know if it's going to show up on the computer monitor on Zoom, but you can probably see it happening on your paper at home. And I'm using the Derwent Inktense paper. It's their wet media paper. And you want a paper that's meant for wet media because it has sizing in it. And the sizing is what allows your paint to lift up when we do the lifting techniques. It also allows the paint to spread, and it allows the paint to sit on top of the paper and not get all the paper doesn't get all kind of pilly and broken apart. So it's kind of like a glue that's in the paper that keeps it nice and robust. Now you can leave out some of the white highlights if you want, just leave the white of the paper, but we're going to use the pastel pencils. If you have pastel pencils, we're going to use those to do some details and add a little smidgen of accent and color here and there. Now, when you're using your paint thick like this, you're not going to get the granulation. Why? Because we don't have all the water, like all the water that we put in the background that helps the paint float, the pigment particles float and settle out. That's how you get that texture. So if you're wondering why you've got a pretty texture here, but you don't have any in the darker areas, it's because we don't use as much water. And I want to lift a little bit of highlight over these other two propellers. So again, clean my brush. I'm just going to dab off the extra water. Just pull up a little highlight, a soft highlight. It's not going to be really bright. You can even go back in with like a paint pen or a gel pen if you wanted to. You give it some really bright highlights when you're done. Sometimes that's best like a day or two after, so you can kind of assess how your paint looks and then decide if you want to do more to it. If you really want to lift out a color and it started to dry, what I recommend is taking a smaller flat brush, synthetic, so it's got a little bit of a stiffness to it, and then you can kind of scrub in there a little bit. And you need a sized paper for that. If your paper is not sized and you try to go in and scrub, then what happens is you end up lifting up the little edges of the paper fibers, and it pills on you. All right, I'm going to grab my round brush again and some of this reddish brown color. I'm going to add a little bit of that in these top sections. The Graphitint's more opaque than traditional watercolors as well. I'm going to get some of the more yellowy brown color, kind of more of an ochre, and I am going to add that. I'm just going to like trace the circle here. And don't worry if your edges are a little bit messy, because we've got all kinds of little zhuzhing we're going to do to this. So don't worry about that. It will be fine. Trust me. And don't worry if your colors blend a little bit here in this murky, shadowy part, because we can't really see what absolutely is happening in there. So it's fine if it's a little vague. I'm going to go back in with my color and fill in some of the rest of this. I will leave little slivers of white though to help me see where like the edges of the different contraptions are. I don't really know anything about airplanes, so when I'm drawing a plane, I'm just kind of like seeing what I can see, and then probably if somebody was an airplane pilot or mechanic, they'd be like, "What is that?" But I'm just giving the impression of the airplane. Just leave little sparkly bits, just little bits of white paper, so you can kind of see your way back. And then this part in the center and the remaining area here, we're going to do with a light gray. I just realized we had a power outage the other day, and so my wall clock is not right because I usually keep an eye on that to see what time we're at. Let's see. I'm going to add a little bit of water in that to lighten it up, but as it dries, it's going to get lighter as it gets more reflective. I think it's really useful when you get a new supply to really spend some time with it and see what it's capable of, and then start mixing it with the other supplies you have and see how they work together. Because a lot of times you find fun new ways to use stuff just by mixing it up. And also, I find that when I'm thinking about buying something new, trying what I have that's similar gives me new ways to use things I already have, which is nice. I think I want to add a little more water to this area because I do like that texture, and I think it might give it a little bit of a more vintage texture if I have a little more water in here. Just be careful as you get close to other wet areas, you leave a little gap so it doesn't make your background color whoosh into your plane. This lighter gray has such a pretty texture to it. These bars are also available open stock, so if you don't think you would have the need for all the colors, or if you use one up, you can replace just one color. And we're going to go into the center with that. And if you find that like something has gotten a little distorted as you're working, all you have to do is when you're painting, like say some of this background color got into that center area, just take a brush that's a little bit stiffer. I like to use a small flat or filbert for this. And then just kind of scooch it back where it belongs. No big deal. Now while I'm at it, I would like to add a little bit of highlight, but I want my paint to stay where I put it, so I don't want too much water. So you can switch to a smaller brush if that's more convenient for you. I'm just going to wet my brush a little bit. I'm dry my brush a little bit rather, and go into some of that darker gray because I want to be able to control where my strokes go. So I want my brush to be a little bit drier, and I'm going to just do kind of like a little C stroke here. Going to put a little dot in the center for the middle of the propeller. And I am going to give it a little bit of a shadow at the edge down here. All right, I'm also going to look down here for any areas where I feel like I want a little bit more shadow, and I'll mix both of my grays together so I don't end up with it too dark. And I'm just going to kind of, oh, it's almost like dry brushing, but we're dry brushing on wet paper. I'm just going to kind of scooch in some dark, but I want that rough texture. I'm just going to kind of tap it and drag it in like you would if you were dry brushing. Now, something that's really fun that you can do if you have a water-soluble pencil, such as the Graphitint pencils, is you could go in and you could draw onto the wet paper and get some really dark lines, and that would be a really nice way to do that. Now, I think it'll also work with the pastel pencils while they're wet, and we're going to give that a try right now just to see. And I'm actually going to give this black one a little bit of a sharpen Got one of the Derwent Pastel pencil sharpeners. I'm going to do it over my trash can though, so I don't get crumbs everywhere. Now, a trick that I do sometimes when I've got all my pencils and they're all dull is my husband has a belt sander, so I go over into my husband's workshop and I turn on the belt sander and I sharpen all my pastel pencils on that, because you can't use them in a regular electric sharpener because they get, oh, that works so good. Look at that. You can't use it in a regular electric sharpener unless you really love taking apart your electric sharpeners and picking chalk bits out of them. But you can use an electric belt sander thing, and that works excellent. Oh, wow. This is see, I'm telling you, guys, try different things with, like, I didn't have my Graphitint pencils out here, so I'm like, oh, I'm just going to try this with a pastel. It works great. Look at this line I got. This is amazing. So we all learn new things all the time when we do this. This is a great way to get, it's like, if you, I don't know, if you remember doing this in grade school, but not grade school, high school, but I was in high school in the early 90s, and we used to take our eyeliner and we used to either light it up with a lighter, or we'd stick it on a hot light bulb to make it extra, extra dark. And that's what this reminds me of. Oh, there, I'm using this gray to put the rivets. Man, this is working much better than using it dry after the fact. So go ahead and do that right now. Save yourself like 5 years on a painting. Man, that's awesome. That's exciting. Now I kind of want to re-wet these areas up here so I can do that. I wonder how white would work. Let's just try that. I was going to do the white at the end, but let's just see. Let's see how the white works on wet paper. It works. It's not as exciting though. I think you're better off using the lighter colors on dry and the darker colors on wet. That's my hot take there. Although I am wondering how a little ochre color. I can do a little bit of the browns and ochres in there. Although I'm kind of afraid they might get a little too dark. Another way you can lift with this medium, but you do want to make sure it's completely dry, is that you can lift with an electric pencil sharpener. That works really well, like for highlighting your clouds. I'll have to dry this with a heat tool to show you that technique if you want to see it, because otherwise, if the paper's damp paper is very fragile, and it would damage it for sure. But I do think I want to wet to this area in here and go in with some black and do some cross hatching. So let's do that. I'm going to actually grab a little bit more of this brownish red color while I'm at it. I'm going to go in there and just hit a bunch of those areas. Plus this brown is going to warm up the color inside the middle of the propeller and make it just have a little bit of color temperature difference from the propellers and help the propeller stand out more. All right, let's go back to that black pencil and do some cross hatching. It's going to be hard to see on camera, but what you're doing is, well, let me grab a scrap of paper here and I'll show you. So what I was doing in there, doing some lines that go like that, and then some lines that go almost like you're making a screen type effect. You guys probably all know what cross hatching means, but I'd rather just make sure. I think it's going to show up really well when it's dry. All right. Well, I think at this point, I'm going to dry this really quick with my heat tool. Molly, does anyone have any questions for me at this stage?
Not quite. Someone asked if, sorry, let me scroll back up here. Someone had asked if you could use color pencils on top of the Graphitints.
You can. It probably won't stick. stick quite as well as the pastel pencils, but yeah, make sure it's completely dry though if you're going to use colored pencils. Watercolor pencils, pastel pencils, Graphitint, any water-soluble pencil you can use while it's wet or dry. But if it's like a Color Soft or ChromaFlow, you want it to be completely dry or you're going to dig up that paper. You can see it lightening up a bit as we dry it out. You can see that the results are much softer when it's dry and the sheen from the water has gone down. But like I promised, I will show you what I meant about highlighting with an eraser. You don't have to have one. You can do it with a pastel, or you can scrub out more with your watercolor. I'm just going to set this aside here so my hand can fit in here. But what I would do for the clouds, for instance, of course, you can do it with the white chalk or a pastel pencil, but what you can do is, say you want to shape your clouds a little bit, you can use your electric pencil sharpener to make like the fluffs on the top of your clouds. And really, you might not feel like you have to do much other than that once you get a little definition in there. I think it's nice for giving you kind of a, giving you the edge of the cloud that's, it's crisp but soft. It's not like, you know, it's not harsh. And I feel like that looks really natural. So just like these clouds on this side are a little bit more defined than the clouds on this side, which are a little bit softer. I think they're both pretty. It's just whatever you like the most, honestly. It can be a little bit tricky to get used to using the electric sharpener because it can feel like it wants to run out of your hands a little bit, like run away with you. So you might want to practice on something that's not so precious until you get the hang of it. It can be sometimes hard to do a straight line as well. So, you know, maybe you might even want to use a ruler, it against a ruler or something if you're really struggling to make a crisp line. I'm going to try to do the highlight along the edge there. And I've got my wrist resting on the table because I'm afraid that if I don't, I'm going to lose my line. And if I have to stop, I'm going to lift up my hand. I'm going to put it where it's more comfortable, and I'm going to touch it down over where I've already gone, and then give it more pressure and push it along. So if you have to lift up the eraser, try to do it as you're moving it so you just get a softer edge. I've got a little area of graphite that's shoved over to the edge when I was doing that, so I'm going to try to clean that up a little bit. There we go. Cleaning that up a little bit. There we go. Do it over here. Now, of course, if you don't have the pencil eraser here, you can actually do it with a regular skinny eraser if you want to, or use your pastel pencil. I'm just giving you a different option. So you can see whether this might be something that is something you want to try. And I'm still going to go over it with a pastel pencil anyway, because I think that gives me a brighter effect here. But you can go in there and add highlight to wherever you like. I feel like I need to do a fresh eraser. Let's see, how do I do this? Oh no, I can't remember how to change my eraser top. Yeah, well, we'll switch to the pastel pencil because I can't remember how to change out the eraser. on the spot here. All right, so that gives us a little bit of highlight, a little bit of sheen. It's looking better already. And now I think we'll switch over to our pastel pencils. And I'm going to start in with my brightest color. I'm going to start in with the white. And I'm going to sharpen up the edge here. And be careful when you're using your white. Your white is generally going to be your most fragile color, which means it's the most easy to break. And it would not be a bad idea to have a piece of paper, like either glassine or wax paper or deli paper or something, to put under your hand if you're going to rest your hand on your artwork. I know it's probably not the best habit, but I tend to do it. It just helps me keep a steady hand. I do find that if you use a paintbrush or an eraser to lift out your color first, then it does make it a little bit easier for the white to grab. I think because graphite can be kind of slippery. They use graphite as a lubricant. So if you can get that slippery effect off your paper before you go in with another product, it often will work a little bit nicer for you. Go in and add highlight to the edges of things. You can smudge it with your fingers, which is nice. And bring this highlight right off to the edge. I think this is fun because it's like a nice bridge between painting and drawing. One thing I noticed when I was teaching children is that especially boys they'd get really proficient and comfortable with drawing, but then when it came to using color, they were very nervous and they didn't want to do it because it was kind of like you're starting all over again. You got good at this one thing and now you're starting over again, and now you have to learn again, and it can be tricky, and then your work might not look as polished, and they would want to just stay with pencil because they were getting predictable results in pencil. And something like this where you can use it, like the water-soluble graphite, where you can use it dry or wet, I think that's kind of a nice way to get somebody moving into color when they've been so comfortable with pencil. Because you have a whole new vocabulary when you start using color, and you don't want to be limited, especially a child. You don't want to be limited by only using black and white. Highlight all the way around, and that's going to help it appear round. Usually a little bit more light at the top because it's outside and the sun is in the sky. And now I'm going to go in with, I think I'll try this light gray. This is called aluminum gray. Get this kind of matte metal effect. It's not shiny like chrome. It's kind of more of a matte. Got a shadow being cast by this propeller, I think, on the body. And every layer we add, every new pencil, we're adding a certain amount of a finished look to our picture, which is nice. Now, if you prefer a more smooth look, you go ahead and blend it with your fingers. Or you can use a blending stump. I prefer to use my fingers, but I know that gives some people the oogies and they don't like it. So use whatever you prefer. That's my general philosophy, is use whatever you prefer, because we're all different. We're all going to like different stuff. I'm going to go in and start to add some detail here. This black is nice and soft, and it really lays down beautifully. And you're just suggesting detail. I mean, we can't really see what's going on perfectly inside the depths of this propeller. We just want to kind of suggest some machinery. We want to suggest some texture. We want to suggest some shadow and some shape. Water-soluble graphite does not smudge as much though. Once it's dry, like if you had this was regular graphite and you put your hand down on it, you moved your hand across, it would smudge quite a bit. So you're not going to have quite as much of a smudging issue with the water soluble. But if you use these sticks dry and you didn't like add water to it, you would have that smudging again. So just something to keep in mind. But honestly, I could tell you all these tips and tricks, but until you sit down and you use the product, it's really hard to remember it. So just play with it and use it. That's how you're going to learn the most. I'm deepening some of those little cast shadows from the propeller a little bit. Go back to the white and add some highlights on the center part. I'm going to sharpen this really quick over my trash can. Molly, are these the brand new Derwent pastel pencil sharpeners, or have these been available for a while?
Oh, I couldn't come off mute quick enough. Those are the same ones, Lindsay, that have been available.
Yeah, they're working great.
Yeah.
I've had a problem with like just regular, like when I use my regular pencil sharpener to sharpen my pastel pencils, I feel like I dull my pencil sharpener. I think that might be a good idea to keep a sharpener separate for your pastel pencils. I don't know why it is exactly, but they do seem to dull my regular sharpeners. This one's been doing great though. Although I usually use an electric sharpener for my color pencils, especially the soft ones. It tends to be a little gentler than a handheld. Okay, we're going to start putting in some of our brighter shadows, so highlights rather. So like places that you might have experimented with your erasing for highlights, you can add those brighter highlights either over all the area or just in some of the area. Like I've got a sharp highlight there, but then I want a softer highlight right here. And while I'm thinking of it, I'm going to grab the black and I'm going to add shadow kind of coming on the bottom of this blade. And if you have gaps, sometimes you get a gap where you're painting one thing, because sometimes we try not to let the paint flow. So we leave a little gap. You can bring a color down into that gap so that it looks like your propeller's in front. There's not like a gap between the sky and the propeller. And then I very carefully like to run my finger right along the edge and try to smooth it out. Oh, I like that. I'm going to do a little bit of that right here too. Give this propeller a little dip in the center. Over here, I'm going to take the black and work in here. You could also use a pastel stick if you wanted to do this painting and work larger. A stick might be a little tough to manipulate in the smaller areas of our smaller painting today, but it's the same process. There's also the XL charcoal, which are big chunky sticks of charcoal. Those are very smudgy. Just to let you know, I know some people have an aversion to the smudgy on their fingers. And you definitely would want a fixative. I did, in my sketchbook, I sprayed fixative on my illustration here. I used Krylon workable fixative, and the reason I did that was because otherwise it would have smudged onto my facing page in my sketchbook. And it did make my colors a little bit darker when I did that, which I thought was actually kind of pretty. So if you wish your blacks were blacker, your colors were deeper, give it a good spray of fixative. And if you don't have fixative, and you're not worried about like longevity, you could use hairspray. I honestly have not had any problem with hairspray on my sketchbooks, but I feel like I do need to to say that just because they haven't tested hairspray to be archival or anything. But it's a really good hack, especially if you got kids bringing home artwork from school and you want to keep it from smudging. It's a great kind of like something you can grab from your bathroom real quick and get the job done. I think the main difference between hairspray and artist fixative is the extra additional oils and stuff that, like silicones and stuff that are in hairspray to protect your hair, so it's not just a glue. And fixative is a little bit more like glue. But I definitely would use it if you're working in a sketchbook. Use some fixative or something to keep it from getting on your facing pages, because that's a bummer. I like to add smudges and flaws here and there. I think that adds character and looks nice when you have a vintage type of subject. Try to avoid adding black where you think you're going to want to go back in with a white highlight, because then it's going to get muddy and gray when you try to put the white on top. So just kind of think about that as you're going. I'm going to do some black up here. I'm going to sharpen this real quick over a trash can. Pastel pencils are not a product I would necessarily pick out for your young children. Not that they're unsafe. The only thing is that pastel pencils, if you drop your tin of pastel pencils on the floor, you're going to be very sad every time you go to sharpen them, because they're going to crumble on you. So if kids are taking their art supplies to school and they're banging around in their backpacks and stuff, it's not gonna, they can't take it. I don't care what the brand is. Your pastel pencils aren't going to survive that. So if you think this might be something your kid would like and your child is young, I definitely would have that be an at-home art supply. Maybe put them in jars with a little foam at the bottom of the jar or something, so they can use them and you don't have to worry about them getting banged around in the backpack, because that's frustrating every time if you go to sharpen them, and every time you sharpen them, they're breaking on you. And I will say that the XL blocks are very messy for kids, so that's something you might want to consider too, avoiding with your young children if they don't clean up after themselves as well as you would like.
Hey, Lindsay, someone asked what the difference is between pastel pencils and colored pencils are. Would you mind just kind of touching on that?
Sure, absolutely. Pastel pencils, like colored pencils, have a wood casing with a media on the inside. Colored pencils is a mixture of wax and oil and pigment, and pastel pencils is a mixture of pigment and clay, and it might have a little bit of chalk or something in there to bind it together. Pastel pencils are softer and they're more prone to breaking, so you can't use them in an electric sharpener because they'll snap and jam your sharpener. Whereas colored pencils, they have a variation of hardness from like softer, waxier pencils like the Derwent Color Soft or ChromaFlow to the harder pencils that have less, that are less waxy, like the Propeller, which are really hard, and they can range that gamut. But your pastel pencils are even softer than that and aren't gonna you know, they're just more prone to breaking. It's kind of like the difference between like a piece of chalk and a crayon that you would color with. The chalk being closer to a pastel pencil and a crayon being closer to a colored pencil. I hope that makes sense. And if you wanted to use them together, which I love to mix my media, I would recommend that you would do your pastel or your pastel pencil first and smudge it out as much as you want to smudge it. And then maybe give it a spray of fixative, and then you can use your pencil on top, and it works great. You don't even have to spray it with fixative, but it's up to you if because the pastel will continue to move around a bit if you don't. But it's a great way to get a base layer in, is to use your pastel pencils first and then use colored pencil. I think we did that once or twice in past Derwent classes. I'm thinking that we did it for a dragonfly and or butterfly and maybe a plum. I think we mixed those two together and it worked really well. And you can use pastel pencils over anything, like over anything that's not like slick. So these ones stick on the waxy surface of a colored pencil, but it would stick over a watercolor really well or gouache really well. So play around with it and see what you can make. All right, now we are in the evaluation phase where we look at our picture and we try to decide what else it needs. I'm thinking it could use a little bit more white over here. Now, I also like to use a gel pen for highlights, and I can't remember if I put one in the supply list or not. But for those super duper bright highlights, a paint pen or a gel pen is really nice. And also I sign my name with a paint pen. But I do that kind of at the end. I would also like to bring in a little bit of background there. I didn't quite bring my sky in far enough, so I'm going to go back to my blocks. I'm going to take a small brush and some water. I might even be able to smush the pigment that I have there in, but I'm just going to try to touch up there where I didn't quite have it close enough. And then I'm just kind of feathering it out. I'm just kind of tapping my brush and bringing it out so it doesn't look like I left a gap. And while I'm at it, I'll look around, see if there's any other places I could do that too. Right there. And then what I'll do is I'll just keep tapping and wiggling my brush until I don't have any product left on my brush. And then it will just build itself into the clouds. It's important to know how to fix our mistakes as artists because we all make them. I don't care how long you've been painting or how proficient of an artist you are, you're still going to be making mistakes, because if you are not making mistakes, then you're not trying anything new and you're not learning. If there's anything that you want to blend out, like any pastel pencil that you're like, oh, that's too grainy, but I can't get my fingers in there the way I want to, you can blend it out with a wet brush, and it will make that pastel pencil, it'll turn it into kind of like a paint, kind of like a watercolor pencil. And then you can spread any pastel that's looking a little too grainy. And that's personal preference. Some people love to see a little bit of grain in their paper and others don't. I would rather have it smooth than have it grainy, but that's my preference. You can do whatever looks better to you. You can also, if you had like the charcoal blocks, the Derwent XL charcoal, you can use a wet brush and pick up the colors. Just keep in mind that when it dries, it's still going to be very smudgeable. So you would need to use a fixative on it. Even though it's water soluble, it doesn't have like that enough binder in it that's going to make it as stuck to the paper like watercolor would. All right. I think I want a little bit of a brighter pop, so I'm going to use a gel pen. Use a paint pen, whatever you happen to like and have on hand. And I'm just going to put it in the areas where I think I would want the brightest shine. You do not have to do this. This is a preference.
Hey
You want to
Lindsay, a
work?
couple people are saying that they use the Graphitint paint pan set
Mhm.
and then use the pastel pencil over top of it, and they were having trouble. I'm wondering if it's the paper they might have used.
It could be because I think the Graphitin paint pan set and the XL graphite blocks are the same. It's like the same product,
They're
isn't it?
yeah, they're slightly different, but they're a very similar formulation, so it should be
Mm.
okay. For those of you that are having trouble, did you guys use, you may not have used the Inktense paper, but did you at least use like some type of watercolor based paper? I'll see what they say.
Yeah, it could be the smoothness of the paper too. Like if you're using a hot press watercolor paper, that could be a little too smooth to grab the pastel pencil. Or it could be the amount of it could be the amount of product. Like if you have the more graphite you have down, the more slippery the paper is going to be. The gel pen doesn't want to stick on top of the pastel. It's giving me a hard time, so I have to keep scribbling it off on my hand to get an A to stay. I don't know if I want to try a paint marker. I'm afraid a paint marker might be a little too much for that. The pen works great over the graphitin or the graphite, but over the pastel pencil it wants to clog up with the dust. So I'm gonna try to put it only on where I've had the graphite. Like I want to do it here. I want to go just over the edge of the graphite and not over the pastel. That's bright enough. I don't think I'll bother with that. If I get just the edge of the propeller before it gets into the pastel, it will grab all right there. Yeah, you can touch it up as much or as little as you want. I think it looks lovely. Oh, if your clouds, if you weren't happy with how much you could erase from your clouds, or maybe you didn't have a an eraser to try, we can do that with the pastel pencil. I'm just going to sharpen it to expose a little bit more lead. You can also use if you don't have a sharpener that's working well for you on your pastel pencils, you can also use like a craft knife and just try to whittle off the wooden part and leave the lead exposed. See, if you want those puffy clouds a little bit brighter, you can just use the edge and pop in some of those brights. And I hope you enjoy how your picture came out today, but most importantly, I hope that you enjoy the techniques and you try them in your own paintings. Now, when you're smudging, make sure you use a clean finger. If you're doing those clouds, you don't want to be smudging gray or black in there. And then I'll probably just sign my name on the propeller like I did there. We can take off our tape and see our beautiful artwork. Did you find out, Molly, from what the variable might be?
No, well, they all seem to use cold press watercolor paper, but they were saying the Graphitint was so slick that the pastel paint wouldn't, or the pastel pencil wouldn't go over top of it. And I'm wondering if it was just too much pigment. Or
Maybe,
maybe
or
it didn't
maybe
dry. Maybe they
the
didn't
paper was,
dry.
yeah, if it was damp at all, it's not going to stick.
Yeah.
If it's really wet and you have a darker color, it'll grab it like we were doing earlier. But if it's damp, you're just going to flatten the tooth of the paper. And then the more you try, the flatter the tooth gets, and then you don't have those ridges that will grab the media. So I have a feeling that maybe it was still a little damp. Or it could be too much pigment. But I would bet it's probably a damp issue. One thing you can do to test your paper is to like touch the paper with the back of your hand, and if it feels room temperature, it's dry. But if it feels at all cool, then it's still damp. And if you go in there with a dry media pencil, you're just going to flatten the tooth of it, and And then it's just going to be harder to get anything to stick because it's kind of like trying to draw on glass versus trying to draw on like sandpaper. Sandpaper would grab all kinds of media. Glass wouldn't let you put anything down. And that's kind of what your paper does. Do we have any other questions, Molly?
I don't think so. A lot of people have to run. They've got another commitment to run too. So yeah, people are saying great class. So thank you so much, Lindsay.
Oh, my pleasure. Oh, some people are holding their paintings up. I get to see the paintings. I love that. I got to scroll through real quick before we go. You guys, oh my goodness, these look awesome. If you post these on social media, please tag me at Lindsay Wyrick. Please use a hashtag Make It With Michaels and tag Derwent at Derwent_art_US so we can all see these in like close up because we can only see so much on Zoom. These look amazing, you guys. Wow. Oh, good job, guys. I am so impressed. Well, Felicia, if you want to put the camera on me, I'll say bye, I guess. It's been so fun to paint with everyone today. It's so nice to see your artwork. You guys were really cooking with fire there, getting those paintings done so quickly. And I hope you learned something new. So I guess that's all we have for today. For Michaels and Derwent, my name is Lindsay Wyrick. Thank you so much for coming. Thanks to Molly and Felicia for board oping the event. And thanks to all of you for spending some of your afternoon with me today. I had a blast and I hope you did too. So till next time, happy crafting, and we'll paint with you again real soon. Bye.